She never saw the lightning strike the fuselage. She only felt the moment the world above her seemed to explode into white fire and tearing metal. Juliane Koepcke had been gripping the armrest for almost an hour as the turbulence worsened, the young flight attendants stumbling through the aisle with forced smiles while passengers prayed under their breath. Beside her, her mother tried to reassure her, squeezing her hand whenever a jolt hit hard enough to make the luggage bins rattle. They were flying over the Amazon, but the storm outside swallowed every view of the jungle, turning the windows into flickering sheets of glowing gray. When the aircraft shook again, it felt different, heavier, more violent, as if something massive had struck the side of the plane. A flash lit the cabin, brighter than anything Juliane had ever seen. A deafening crack followed, and the aircraft lurched so violently that passengers were thrown against their seatbelts. Overhead compartments burst open, bags dropped, a tray cart slammed into a row of seats. Before she could take a breath, the entire plane pitched sharply downward. The cabin filled with screams and the hollow groan of metal twisting out of shape. Then the roof tore open, the floor buckled, and an instant later, the whole aircraft broke apart in midair. Wind roared through the cabin like a hurricane. The force ripped Juliane's seat free from the floor. She felt herself sucked upward and out into the open sky, still strapped to the row of seats like a tiny fragment of a vanishing machine. She didn't hear her own scream. She heard nothing but the rush of the air and the pounding of her heart as she spun, the rainforest rising toward her in a dizzying whirl of green and shadow. Her last sight of her mother was a blur of orange cloth lost in the storm. Then the world became a blur of leaves and violent impacts as she crashed through the canopy, each branch breaking her fall but ripping into her skin, until finally the jungle swallowed her completely. She woke to silence. Real, heavy silence, the kind that settles only after chaos. Her ears rang so loudly she thought the plane was still falling. She lay face up on damp soil, staring at slivers of sky framed by broken branches. Her right collarbone felt shattered. Her eye was swollen shut. Her entire body ached with deep bruises and cuts. She tried lifting her head, and nausea rolled through her. For a moment, she didn't know where she was or how she had gotten there. Then memory rushed back in fragments. Her mother holding her hand, the storm, the tearing metal, the sense of falling. She called out for her mother, each attempt weaker than the last. The jungle absorbed her voice instantly. Nothing answered her. She forced herself upright despite the stabbing pain and the dizziness that threatened to drop her again. Shreds of the plane were scattered among the trees, papers stuck to branches, small pieces of metal half buried in leaves, scraps of fabric fluttering in the faint breeze. But there were no other voices, no movement she recognized as human. She realized with a cold sense of finality that the forest was her only company now. Juliane had grown up around the Amazon. Her parents were biologists who had raised her at a research station deep in the rainforest. She knew the dangers. She knew the rules. Panic killed faster than anything else. And if she was going to survive at all, she needed to follow the one lesson her father repeated every time they hiked. Find water, then follow it. Streams led to rivers. Rivers led to people. She listened carefully, tuning out the constant buzz of insects until she caught the faint trickle of a small creek somewhere beyond the trees. She limped toward the sound, pushing through vines and undergrowth, her bare feet sinking into mud and catching on sharp stones. Reaching the creek gave her a small jolt of hope. The water was shallow, brown, and littered with plant debris, but it moved steadily, and movement meant direction. She walked directly in the water to avoid getting lost, each step slow, painful, and deliberate. Hours stretched endlessly. Her injuries made it hard to keep her balance. She fell more than once, catching herself on the wet banks and reopening cuts. At night, she curled beneath large leaves, trying to ignore the sting of insects crawling across her skin. Rain fell in heavy sheets that soaked her clothing and chilled her to the bone. She tried to sleep, but every sound startled her. The distant screech of birds, the constant hum of insects, the occasional snap of a branch that hinted at animals moving nearby. On the second or third day, she had already lost track. She found a section of the aircraft seats wedged against a fallen log. 3 bodies were still strapped in, half buried under mud and leaves. She turned away quickly, choking back tears and fear. She whispered her mother's name, hoping somehow she was alive, somewhere along the river, waiting. But the jungle gave no sign. She kept following the creek as it widened into a small stream. Sometimes she walked. Sometimes she let the water carry her, floating on her back with one hand hooked around a branch or log so she wouldn't drift into dangerous currents. She drank constantly, knowing dehydration would kill her before hunger ever had the chance. She thought about the lessons her father had taught her, the shape of poisonous plants, the danger of bright berries, the way snakes hid beneath leaves near the water's edge. Her thoughts moved in slow, deliberate circles, the same words repeating in her mind, keep going, keep going, keep going. By the 5th or 6th day, her cuts were swollen and infected. One wound on her arm throbbed violently, the skin around it hot and tight. When she peeled back the edge of torn fabric, she saw maggots wriggling inside the tissue. The sight should have terrified her, but she remembered what her father once told her. Maggots meant the wound wasn't rotting. They were keeping it clean. That small bit of knowledge kept her from falling into despair. Storms soaked her again, washing dirt from her arms and cooling her fevered skin. The sun followed, beating down through breaks in the canopy, burning her shoulders and turning every exposed wound into a fresh ache. She drifted between exhaustion and hallucination, sometimes unsure if she was moving or dreaming. But she forced herself onward. She had no map, no food, no shoes, no sense of time, only a determination not to die alone in the jungle. On the 10th morning, she saw something out of place, a small boat tied to a bank where the river curved around a cluster of thick trees. For a moment she assumed it was another hallucination, but the colors were too solid, too real. She staggered toward it and found a wooden shelter nearby, a hut used by local fishermen. Inside, she discovered a can of gasoline. She hesitated only a moment before pouring a small amount onto her infected wound. The burn was intense, but it killed the maggots instantly. She collapsed onto the wooden floor and slept deeper than she had since the fall. Voices woke her the next day. 3 fishermen stepped through the doorway and froze when they saw her, thin, bruised, sunburned, and shaking. She spoke softly, telling them her name, telling them she had survived a plane that broke apart in the sky. At first, they didn't believe her. No one could survive a fall like that. But her injuries, her exhaustion, and the remnants of the aircraft scattered along the river told a story no one could deny. They placed her gently into their boat and carried her to the nearest village, where a doctor examined her and radioed for authorities. After 11 days alone in the rainforest, Juliane Koepcke was rescued. She would learn later that she was the sole survivor of the crash. Everyone else, including her mother, perished somewhere in the jungle. Juliane had fallen nearly 2 miles from the sky into one of the most unforgiving places on Earth, and she walked out alive. Her survival wasn't luck alone. It was instinct, knowledge, resilience, and the refusal to stop moving no matter how dark the days became. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more unbelievable true stories of survival.